Welcome to Ichiraku Ramen, and thank you for joining me for another journey into the world of shinobi. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who listens, supports the channel, and enjoys these stories. Today's story is titled, City of Strays. In this tale, against all odds, Naruto did it. He brought Sasuke back before he got to Orochimaru. He kept his promise to Sakura. He should be happy. He wanted to be happy. But if anything, he felt lonelier than ever before. Pushed past his breaking point, he leaves Konoha, heading to the ruins of his family's village, a family no one had ever told Naruto about. This is a fan-made story inspired by the world of Naruto. All characters in the original universe belong to their respective creators. This narration is created for entertainment purposes as part of a transformative storytelling experience. The story itself was written by RijusHope and posted by CopyOthers, and full credit goes to the original authors. If you would like to read the original version, the link to the story is included in the video description below. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Chapter 1. Naruto shifted slowly as his eyes blinked open. He frowned in confusion at the white ceiling above him. It seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. How did I get here? What happened? The last thing he remembered was the 9 tails telling him to stay awake. It hadn't sounded worried. Exactly, Naruto wasn't about to expect that from the creature literally trapped inside him, but Naruto had to admit that the fox had shown a hint of concern. "You're the most tolerable of my vessels so far," a deep voice grumbled. Naruto's eyes widened minutely. He didn't realize the fox could hear so many of his thoughts. He hadn't expected the fox to keep talking to him at all. "Don't think this means anything," it growled. "Staying in a cage gets a little boring after a while, kid." "Thank you. I think," Naruto thought, a small smile pulling at his lips. Now, back to figuring out what happened. He tried moving his arms and legs without much success, and looked down to find casts and bandages covering almost every inch of his body. Oh, he was in a hospital, then. "Say, Fox," Naruto said, frowning in confusion at his injuries. "You're really good at healing, right? What's up with all this, then?" An annoyed sigh echoed through his mind. "Even my chakra has limits, brat," it said, and Naruto got the distinct impression that it was rolling its eyes. "And I used too much helping you in that ridiculous fight, so I can't heal until I've regained my strength. And that takes time." Oh, right. Naruto hadn't really thought about that before, the demon fox having limited chakra, that is. When he was using it, it felt so endless. It was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying, especially since he wasn't in full control of himself whenever the Kyuubi's chakra leaked through the seal. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to act like it's your job to heal me or anything." He hesitated, then just went for it. "Are you okay?" Silence replaced the deep, rough voice instantly, as if the fox had snapped its mouth shut or something. The longer the silence drew on, the more restless Naruto became. Had he offended the beast? Had he broken some rule he didn't know about? It wouldn't be the first time. After waiting a minute or two for the fox to reply, to no avail, he said, "Kyuubi? I won't ask you that again if you don't want me to. I didn't mean to make you mad." The Kyuubi was quiet for a few more moments before saying, almost too quietly to hear, "I'll be fine, brat." The voice regained its normal volume as the fox continued. "You should probably be worrying more about yourself," it said wryly. "That was quite a fight you had." A fight? A fight? The longer the blonde laid on the hospital bed, the more he remembered about what caused this particular hospitalization, the mission that he and his friends had just finished. Suddenly he jolted, eyes flying wide in astonishment. "Sasuke. How the fuck did I forget that? Where is he? Did we get him?" He finally took his attention away from the Kyuubi long enough to examine the room around him. There was nothing out of the ordinary, white walls and a few chairs and plants. Sasuke laying in the bed across the room. Wait, his bandages didn't allow him to sit up, but that didn't stop him from trying. Wide-eyed and stunned, he couldn't do anything but stare at his teammate. Sasuke wasn't covered head to toe in bandages like the blonde, but the damage was clearly extensive. A breathless laugh bubbled up in his chest. "I did it," he thought incredulously. "Sakura-chan, I brought him back, just like I said I would." He knew they could do it. After all, Naruto never went back on his word. "What's so funny, brat?" Naruto's head whipped around at the new voice. He hadn't even heard the door open. Once he registered the blonde woman, though, he relaxed, grinning at her. "Ba-chan," he said happily. He tried waving, once again forgetting about the bandages immobilizing his limbs. Tsunade shook her head in exasperation, lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't, Ba-chan, me right now, Uzumaki Naruto," she said, spearing him with a stern gaze. "Do you have any idea how lucky you are?" Her annoyed tone sounded so similar to the fox's that Naruto almost laughed aloud and told her so, but he hesitated at the last second as anxiety began creeping back in. Now, Tsunade was wonderful, and Naruto knew he could trust her. But he realized that he still didn't feel comfortable mentioning his conversation with the Kyuubi to anyone, and especially not how the fox helped him during the fight at the Valley of the End. Everyone would just freak out and assume the seal was breaking, that the fox was about to destroy the village again. Who knows what they'd do to Naruto and the fox if that were to happen? Would he be locked up? Would he constantly be watched by Anbu, like he had been before he graduated from the academy? Blinking, he shook those thoughts away. Not the time. "Well, it must be bad if I look like a mummy," he joked, carefully leaving out any mention of chakra and tailed beasts. Tsunade's gaze hardened into a glare. "Had either of you boys taken one more good hit to the chest, you probably would have died," she said severely. "Kakashi was frantic when he showed up with the pair of you, unconscious and beaten to within an inch of your lives. And by each other, no less." Naruto frowned. His chest tightened at the insinuation that he had been deliberately and overly aggressive. It wasn't as if he started throwing punches as soon as he saw his teammate. Even during the fight, Naruto had continued pleading with the boy, asking him to come back, asking Sasuke to let his teammates help him, telling him how much they all cared about him. "I was just trying to bring him back," the blonde said in a small voice, hating the way his voice wavered as he stared down at his lap. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "I tried, Ba-chan, I promise." He wouldn't listen, and I couldn't let him go to Orochimaru. He heard Tsunade take a long, slow breath before she spoke. "I know," she said, much more softly this time. "You gave it your all, just like you always do. You all did, right?" His friends had gone on the mission with him. "Is everyone else okay?" he asked worriedly, biting at the inside of his cheek. Neji and Choji, and Kiba and Shikamaru and Bushy Brow. A tiny smile finally appeared on the woman's face. "All of them were pretty banged up, but they'll all be just fine," she said reassuringly. "Kiba, Shikamaru, and Lee have already been discharged. Choji and Neji are resting now, which is what you should be doing, too." She raised an eyebrow at him expectantly. Naruto sighed in relief, head thumping back against his pillow. Everyone was okay, then. Yes, it sounded like everyone had been seriously injured, but none of their wounds would have lasting damage, and all of them were alive. Sasuke was back, and that was all he had hoped for. The blonde honestly couldn't believe their mission had gone so well. But as he closed his eyes, a small smile on his lips, he fell asleep thinking that this nightmare was finally over. He should have known. Nothing was ever that easy, not for Naruto. Sasuke woke up 3 days after Naruto did. The blonde was actually getting discharged later that day. The Kyuubi had recovered the day before, so Naruto's healing abilities were back to how they normally were. It had been kind of funny watching the nurses take off almost all of his bandages at once, since he went from severely injured to minimally wounded in a couple of days. He tried to focus on that, rather than the continued absence of his friends and teammates. Well, Sakura had come every day, but it was as if Naruto wasn't even in the room. She only ever pulled a chair up right next to Sasuke's bed, watching over him anxiously. She had snapped at Naruto any time he tried to talk to her, so eventually he stopped trying. And he thought he had felt Kakashi's lingering presence once or twice, right when he woke up. But the man was never in the room when he was awake. He couldn't help wondering, does he not want to see me? Aside from Tsunade, the hospital staff, and Sakura, Naruto hadn't seen a soul since he woke up. He was really trying not to let it get to him, but it had gotten progressively harder as the days passed. Sakura had been present when Sasuke woke up, naturally. One second, everything was calm, and the next, the girl was crying tears of joy, asking if Sasuke needed anything, and sobbing loudly about how happy she was that he was back. The dark-haired boy didn't respond to any of her remarks, instead turning his head to meet Naruto's gaze. "Give me a few minutes alone with Naruto," he ordered, without breaking eye contact with the other boy. The pink-haired girl huffed, pouting, but chirped, "Of course, Sasuke-kun." In the seconds after the girl left, silence reigned in the room, tension growing more and more suffocating with every passing moment. Why? It wasn't a question. Sasuke's voice was cold and unfeeling, more so than usual. The blonde tilted his head slightly, sitting up and turning so he was sitting on the edge of his bed, facing Sasuke directly. Why what? He was pretty sure he knew the answer, but maybe it was something else, anything else. He needed Sasuke to say it. "Why did you bring me back?" Sasuke growled, anger flaring in his dark eyes. "Well, in the end it was Kakashi who actually brought him back, since we were both unconscious," Naruto reasoned to himself. "That probably wouldn't be the right answer here, though. You're my teammate," he said with a shrug. "And I promised Sakura I would. But even if I hadn't, you're my friend, and I'd have gone after you anyway, promise or no promise." Maybe he shouldn't have been, but Naruto was surprised at the intensity of Sasuke's fury. He had known the boy wouldn't be happy with him, but he hadn't thought that his teammate would ever look at him like he wished he had never met him. Sasuke's voice took on a dangerous edge, the anger in his eyes only growing. "I made it very clear that I don't want anything to do with this village anymore," he snapped. "I don't need to be here to become stronger. Staying is just holding me back. You're holding me back." The venomous words hit their mark. Naruto flinched noticeably, blinking rapidly to keep tears from forming in his eyes. Sasuke putting Naruto down or saying he didn't need friends wasn't anything new, but he had never said it with such anger and resentment before. Naruto opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. He had no idea what to say. How could he explain how important Sasuke was to him? How could he put his feelings for Team 7 into words? How could he possibly explain that the team had become his makeshift family, and he didn't want to lose anyone? "We just want to help you," Naruto said, stumbling clumsily over the words. Sasuke cut him off with a derisive laugh. "Help? You? What could you possibly do to help me? I don't need the team, and I don't need you." His eyes narrowed, as if honing in on the chinks in Naruto's armor. "I don't want you to help me. I don't want to see you. Hell, I don't even like you." Naruto recoiled like the words were a physical blow, but Sasuke wasn't done. Mercilessly, he dealt the final blow. "I hate you," he spat, and his eyes were so dark and cruel that Naruto felt like he was looking at a stranger. The blonde stared at him for a few moments, uncomprehending. "Get out," Sasuke said dismissively, turning his head away from the blonde with a casual air about him. Acting like he hadn't just shattered his friends, teammates, Naruto's heart. Acting like he couldn't care less. Naruto still couldn't find his voice, but he did finally find his feet. He stood unsteadily, nearly tripping in his haste as he rushed to the door. He tore past Sakura, who just gave him a bewildered glance before shrugging off his strange behavior and returning to the room. Still, he kept running straight past all the staff until he could feel the sunlight on his skin, only then slowing to a stop. Physically, he was fine. He was healed. Ba-chan would probably get on his case later about not waiting for her to clear him to go home, but he didn't care. Not right now. Naturally, to get home, he had to pass by Sasuke's window. He tried to resist, he told himself it was a bad idea, but he couldn't stop himself from glancing in. For what? He berated himself. What am I even hoping for? For Sasuke to feel bad, or see me outside and tell me he didn't mean it? He knew it wasn't going to happen, but it didn't stop his stubborn heart from hoping. But no. Sasuke looked as bored as usual, back to ignoring all of Sakura's attempts to fuss over him. It was as if he had never been in the room at all. Am I really so unwanted? He felt hyper-aware of the stares, the whispers, and the jeers that followed him back to his apartment. Were they always that loud? His apartment didn't usually bother him. It was all he had ever really known. After all, but today as he unlocked the door and stepped through, he could physically feel the emptiness surrounding him. He dropped onto his bed heavily, ignoring the fact that he hadn't eaten yet and that he was still fully clothed. He just wanted to sleep. But even sleep couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping into his mind, growing louder by the minute. Why am I never enough? Naruto felt much better the next morning, or, at least, he told himself that he did. A bright smile spread across his face as he stepped out into the morning light. It was early enough that it was still pleasantly cool, but he could still feel the sun on his skin. Perfect weather, the best he could have hoped for. Maybe for training they'd, no. He shut the thought down before it could go any further. He didn't want to think about them right now. except that left him with the question of what he was going to do. He'd be far too restless to stay in his apartment all day, but there weren't many places in the village where he was welcome. He thought for a few moments, then lit up as he remembered what Tsunade had told him the day he woke up. Maybe Neji and Choji were still in the hospital. He could go visit one of them. He'd probably try Neji first. Naruto hadn't had many chances to talk to his friend since the Chunin exams. And if Neji wasn't there, maybe he could go to Ichiraku's and see if he could bring something to Choji. After all, ramen always made Naruto feel better. Surely it would help Choji too, right? And if all else failed, he could go bother Shikamaru. He was probably just off watching clouds or something. Mind made up, he nodded firmly to himself and set off, enjoying the stillness in the air. It was still early enough that the streets weren't overly crowded yet. So Naruto could enjoy the weather, and he didn't have to unsuccessfully ignore the villagers' hatred. His good mood shattered before he even set foot inside the hospital. He really wished he had enough self-control to keep himself from looking, but it was like his eyes were magnetically drawn to Sasuke's window. "Please be asleep, please be asleep, please be asleep," he chanted internally. But no such luck. The dark-haired boy was sitting up with his back against the headboard. As expected, Sakura was right by Sasuke's side, wearing a radiant smile even in the face of the other boy's scowl. But then he followed Sasuke's dark gaze across the room and nearly choked on his own breath. Kakashi. He was there, too. The entire team was there without him, and by the looks of it, they were doing just fine without him. Sasuke's words from the previous day flashed through his mind. "I don't need you. I don't want you to help me. I don't want to see you. I hate you." He didn't realize his feet had stopped moving until he nearly overbalanced and fell forward. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene before him. He almost wanted one of them to look outside and see him, just to see what they would do. If they would invite him in, if they would actually include him. But what if they ignored him instead? He already felt invisible, forgotten. It would be even worse if they saw him and still purposely chose to ignore him. But isn't that what happens anyway? His traitorous thoughts grew louder, pushed to the forefront of his mind. Sasuke and Sakura never acknowledge me during training. They only include me when they have to. Kakashi spent almost all his time last month helping Sasuke train for the one-on-one matches. Did they even really notice that I beat Neji? Or were they too focused on Sasuke's match with Gaara? No, wait, Sasuke and Kakashi weren't even there until the beginning of his fight. They didn't even see mine. Sasuke has always been more important than me, he thought wearily. I don't know why I keep expecting that to change. I'm just a scapegoat, an afterthought. Usually, he could force these thoughts to the back of his mind. Normally he could ignore them and push through, but today, he couldn't find it in himself to counter any of the thoughts ringing in his head. I don't want to see you. Again, he heard those cruel words. Maybe they'd be a better team without me. He'd have expected the words to taste bitter, but he was more resigned than anything else. They'd probably work together better if they didn't have to deal with me, too. They've even said that I'm deadweight. More than once, too. Sakura's disdain, Kakashi's indifference, Sasuke's hatred. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. So leave. The thought caught him off guard, but instead of rejecting it out of hand like he normally would, he turned the idea over in his mind. If he stayed, nothing was going to change. He wouldn't be allowed to switch teams so Team 7 could get rid of him, and he wasn't getting promoted anytime soon. So leave. And oh, how he wished the idea didn't make so much sense. He wished his heart hadn't lightened with a spark of relief and hope. His first thought was that he'd be lonely if he left, but he faltered when the realization hit him. He was already lonely. And if he could choose between being lonely here or leaving the taunts and jeers behind and being lonely outside the village, it wasn't exactly a difficult decision. It was hardly a decision at all. I don't want to see you. Naruto? The blonde jumped in surprise at the unexpected but welcome voice, looking up to see a familiar redhead standing before him. Gaara? He asked. I didn't know you were in Konoha. The barest hint of a smile tugged on Gaara's lips. My siblings and I came to assist your friends while you were pursuing Sasuke, he said in his soft, even-tempered voice. We came back to the village with them to make sure all of you were all right. Warmth curled in Naruto's heart, and he smiled at his friend. Thank you, he said sincerely. For helping us, and for coming back. It's really nice to see you, he finished quietly, gaze falling to the ground between them. The silence didn't last very long before Gaara said conversationally, I was going on a walk around the village before it gets too crowded. Would you like to join me? Naruto's smile brightened slightly as he met Gaara's clear, welcoming gaze. That would be great, he said, forcing himself to walk away without glancing back at the hospital window. Partly to distract himself, but also out of genuine interest, he asked, how has Suna been? I haven't seen you since the Chunin exams. Gaara hesitated, weighing his words carefully. It is difficult, he said. Pain lanced through the blonde's chest. He could hear what his friend wasn't saying. Naruto gently knocked his shoulder against his friend's. Villagers still giving you a hard time? He asked empathetically. The redhead nodded, albeit reluctantly. Many of them are trying, he said, speaking like he was defending them. My siblings are trying, they truly are. But it is not easy to get over more than 10 years of fear. They've been conditioned their whole lives to fear and hate me. That won't change overnight. I should not have expected it to. Well, that's a familiar thought. They wandered off the path and into the trees, Naruto leading Gaara through the woods effortlessly. Gaara frowned, seemingly unsure of himself, and closed his mouth instead of finishing the statement. Naruto tilted his head and came to a stop, gently pulling on his friend's shoulder so he stopped as well. He sobered at the uncertainty and anxiety on his friend's face, the reluctance to let himself be vulnerable. You can tell me anything, you know, he said matter-of-factly, making sure to keep eye contact, trying as hard as he could to show the other boy that he was sincere. And I mean anything. Gaara's small smile made another quick appearance before unease flashed across his face once more. He took a deep breath to steady himself and asked, almost inaudibly, do you ever wish you could just start over? Naruto froze, staring at his friend. He didn't realize that he was quiet for too long until Gaara started shifting uncomfortably, looking like he was about to apologize for asking the question at all. Naruto set his hands on Gaara's shoulders, prompting the boy to look the blonde in the eyes in surprise. Yes, he said emphatically. Gaara, yes. He took a deep breath, involuntarily glancing around as if to make sure they were alone. Only then did he say, voice quiet but firm, sometimes I think I'd be better off without the village, and that the village would be better off without me. Gaara's perceptive eyes watched him knowingly. That's what you were thinking about when I found you earlier, he stated. Naruto could only nod, heart in his throat. The redhead's brows drew together as he thought, and after a few moments of deliberation he met Naruto's eyes again. His normally clear eyes were steely with determination. Then let's do it, he said simply. Naruto's eyes widened. Just an hour ago he had all but resigned himself to a life completely alone, if he had decided to leave, anyway. And then his friend just fell out of the sky suggesting they run together. Maybe the universe doesn't hate me as much as I thought, he thought faintly. Before he knew it, he could feel a smile lighting up his face like the sun. Okay. Gaara startled slightly, as if he hadn't actually expected Naruto to agree. Soon enough, though, his face broke out into an expression of pure relief. It was probably the most emotion Naruto had ever seen the other boy express. Naruto could feel his pulse accelerating in anticipation or in fear. He wasn't certain and he took a few deep breaths to try to calm himself. My dream was always to become the Hokage, so people would acknowledge me, he said quietly. But now, I just want people to see me, and not the Kyuubi, you know? The redhead nodded solemnly, understanding lighting his eyes. After a few moments of surprisingly comfortable silence, he asked, how are we going to do it? Where are we going to go? Naruto stopped, thinking. Good question. He wasn't sure about the second question, but he at least had a few ideas for the first. Honestly, having Gaara in Konoha made things almost laughably easy. I think you should go back to Suna with your siblings, he started. Gaara frowned, disappointment and confusion in his eyes. Why? Because it will be far more suspicious if two Jinchuriki disappear from the same place, at the same time. Gaara relaxed at the explanation, tension draining from his body. Naruto gave him a reassuring smile. So what I'm thinking is, you go back to Suna and stay there for 10 days. Everyone here will be focused on you three while you're leaving, which makes you three the perfect distraction. While the attention is on you and your siblings, I'm going to run. Then I'll meet up with you in Suna, and we can go. Gaara hummed thoughtfully, weighing Naruto's words carefully before he nodded once. That would probably be for the best, he agreed. The thing is, I'm not exactly sure where we're going yet. I just wanted to get away. Naruto fidgeted nervously at the admission, praying that his friend wouldn't back out on him. But Gaara only nodded once more. One step at a time, he said calmly. We can focus on where to go once we've actually left. Once we've actually left. He was really doing this. They were really doing this. Naruto could feel a bright smile overtaking his features even as the tears in his eyes finally fell. He gave a watery laugh and lunged forward to wrap Gaara in a hug. The redhead put his arms around Naruto in return, and for the first time since waking up in Konoha, he felt like he was actually home. It wasn't until Naruto entered his small apartment that he registered the irony of what he was doing. Here he was, having just gotten back from a mission to retrieve Sasuke, and now he was planning on doing the same thing. Well, not the same thing, exactly, he thought, leaning against the doorframe in his room and chewing absent-mindedly on a thumbnail. He was running away because he wanted Orochimaru to give him the power to kill his brother. I'm not looking for revenge. I don't want power. I just want to be left alone and to feel like I actually belong somewhere. The pressure in his chest eased slightly after entangling that comparison. He hadn't realized how much guilt he'd already been feeling, how much of a hypocrite he'd already decided he was until now. With a sigh, he pushed off the doorframe and snagged his backpack from the floor, looking around at the sparsely decorated space thoughtfully. He couldn't take much, he knew that, but it wasn't as if he had much to take in the first place. It was simple enough at first, mostly throwing clothes into the bag. He had just finished when a thought sprang into his mind. He started suddenly, looking down at his bright orange jumpsuit. As much as he loved it, orange wasn't going to do him any favors when people inevitably came looking for him. Reluctantly, he slid out of the jumpsuit and shoved it into a now empty drawer. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Done. Honestly, there wasn't much else for him to pack. He wasn't sure whether he thought that was a good thing or not. Before he could think too much about it, he heard a knock on his door. His head tilted to the side slightly in confusion. No one ever came to his apartment, not even his team members, or Kakashi-sensei, or Iruka-sensei. Definitely not Gigi. Out of all the people he thought it could be, though, he could honestly say that Hyuga Neji was one of the last people he would have guessed. I guess he isn't in the hospital anymore, his mind supplied helpfully. His eyes flickered between Naruto's face and the ground, uncharacteristically uncertain. Neji, hi, Naruto said, his confusion stealing the warmth that would have filled his voice otherwise. Are you okay? The boy nodded firmly. Can I talk to you? He asked, gaze finally locking on Naruto's. Sure. With only a moment's hesitation, Naruto stepped back, allowing the brunette to come in. His friend definitely noticed the poor quality of his apartment and how dirty it probably was compared to clan homes, but he didn't say anything about it, instead turning to face the blonde with a serious look on his face. I heard you, he said shortly, getting straight to the point. Thankfully he continued when he recognized the incomprehension on Naruto's face. You and Gaara, he explained, voice lowering urgently as he took a step closer to the other boy. I heard you too. It took a moment for Neji's words to sink in, but fear sank into his chest like razor-sharp claws. He stared at the brunette in terror, trying to keep himself from hyperventilating and trying to think of something, anything, to say. This is bad. What if he goes to Ba-chan or Kakashi-sensei, or gets Gaara in trouble with Suna, or... Firm hands grasped his shoulders, and he looked up at the older boy in poorly disguised panic. I'm not going to tell anyone, Naruto. It took even longer for this statement to break through the fear filling his mind, but once it did, it felt like time stopped. His jaw dropped. He wasn't certain he was still breathing. Was his heart still beating? There was so much to say to that, but the only thing he could manage was, why not? Neji smiled sadly at him, folding his arms over his chest now that Naruto wasn't on the verge of a panic attack. Do you think I've never thought about doing the same thing? He asked. I know what it's like to be trapped. He gestured to the Hite-8 covering his caged bird seal. If it were possible, I probably would have run a long time ago. And that was a good point. Especially considering how strained his relationships with Hiashi and Hinata were up until now. Before Naruto's mind could catch up with his mouth, he found himself asking, so why not come with me now? His friend's smile shifted into something more bitter and broken. Again, he gestured to the hidden seal on his forehead. I can't run from this, he said. No matter where I am, if I run, They could use this seal to kill me in an instant if they wanted to. You and Gaara are chained to the tailed beasts, and I'm chained to my family. It's better that I just learn to live with it. It's not quite so bad anymore. That sounded horribly similar to how Naruto often felt about his treatment in the village. Just learn to live with it, because it wasn't going to change. Try to be happy in a world that's constantly shoving him down. It was exhausting for Naruto, and he could only assume that it was exhausting for Neji as well. A thought sparked, and his brows furrowed in thought as he looked at Neji closely. Is there a way to get it off? Neji scoffed, and for the first time that day, he looked like he had before the Chunin exams took place, expression hard and eyes chilling. You think I haven't thought of that? He asked, frustrated. This seal has been around for centuries. It can't be undone. That last sentence picked at Naruto's mind. Something about it just seemed wrong to him. Every seal can be broken. Naruto wasn't sure where the words came from, or why he was so sure of this, but it felt right. When Neji raised an eyebrow, skeptical, Naruto waved his hands in front of him. Wait, I'm serious. Like, take mine for example. It's way strong, right? It has to be if it's gonna hold the Kyuubi, but you've seen its chakra get out. I used it during our fight. Any seal can be broken, it's just about how hard it'll be. I'm gonna say that this would be really hard, then, Neji said dryly, but Naruto saw a tiny flicker of hope hidden in the depths of his eyes. You're right, you know. The Kyuubi's voice took him by surprise, and he barely kept himself from jumping. No seal is indestructible. It figures you just know. Naruto frowned slightly. Wait, what do you mean? He heard a rumbling sigh echo through his mindscape, but the Kyuubi didn't seem nearly as annoyed as it was trying to sound. Sealing was your clan's specialty, brat. My clan? I have a clan? The Kyuubi snorted. Of course you do. You had to come from somewhere. The Uzumaki clan created the first Biju seal, as well as many that came after. Naruto felt dread and worry curling around his heart, not wanting to hear the next answer but needing to know anyway. So where did they all go? Why haven't I ever heard about them? The Kyuubi was silent for long enough that Naruto had to hold up a finger to tell Neji to wait. The brunette looked confused but not annoyed, which was all Naruto could hope for at the moment. Finally, he heard the fox say, the Uzumaki aren't from Konoha, not originally. They had their own hidden village, Uzushio. The city was attacked some years ago, and it was completely destroyed. The invasion killed almost everyone. The fox's voice softened in, was that sympathy Naruto was hearing? From the demon fox? As far as I know, your mother was one of the very few Uzumaki left. Naruto? The blonde started. Some of his distress must have been showing on his face, because Neji looked concerned, almost worried. Naruto laughed weakly, smiling at his friend. Sorry, I'm okay. I'll explain in a second, I'm talking to the fox. Considering that this was the Kyuubi they were talking about, Neji took this incredibly well. He opened his mouth to speak before hesitating, closing his mouth, and simply nodding instead. So it's gone? His voice was just above a whisper. Yes, but that's not why I'm telling you this. Now the fox was starting to sound slightly impatient. Naruto was honestly impressed that it held out for as long as it did. If any place had answers about how to break that Hyuga boy's seal, it would be Uzushio. But you said it was destroyed, Naruto protested, even as his heart lightened a bit. The Kyuubi wouldn't have brought it up if it were a completely lost cause, right? When did he start trusting the fox so much? It was, but I would be surprised if they hadn't used Fuinjutsu to reinforce the city, or lock up their sealing materials at the very least. Finally, it clicked, and a bright smile spread across Naruto's face. Neji, he said excitedly. What if I could break it? Neji blinked, taken aback at Naruto's sudden exuberance. Were you listening to me? He asked, incredulous rather than mocking. This isn't some storage scroll from the academy. Naruto nodded, eyes more serious as he met the brunette's clear gaze. I know, he said quietly. But the Kyuubi was telling me about a place called Uzushio. His friend's eyes widened minutely. I've heard that name before, he said slowly, lost in thought as he tried to remember. Suddenly, his gaze snapped back to Naruto's. The city of sealing, he breathed. Exactly. The Kyuubi said that if there was anywhere I could learn about sealing, it would be there. Naruto reached for Neji's shoulders in a mirror of their position a few minutes before. Neji, do you want to come with me and Gaara? Forget about seals and clans for a second, he said, cutting the brunette off when he opened his mouth to protest. "Just tell me, what do you want to do?" Neji was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle clear on his face. Finally, he whispered, "If I could, I'd go with you." Naruto nodded firmly. "Then I'll go to Uzumaki and figure out your seal, then I'll come back for you." "Can you wait?" His friend still seemed slightly stunned, but finally a tiny laugh escaped his lips. "I've been waiting for freedom all my life," he said. "What's a little longer?" The blonde bounced on his feet a few times before throwing his arms around his friend. Rather like Gaara, Neji wasn't sure what to do at first, but his arms wound around Naruto soon enough. "Then I'll find a way to break the seal, and I'll come back for you, I promise. And I never go back on my word." If there was one skill he'd honed from his years of losing his Anbu tails, it was stealth. Case in point, Naruto had easily slipped out of the village while the shinobi at the gate were busy with the departing Sunanen. The Hokage was still in his office, apparently too busy to see the siblings off at the gate. Not that Naruto was complaining, that meant one less person for him to sneak past. Only Gaara had noticed him, and Naruto was pretty sure that was just because he could feel the fox's chakra since he was a Jinchuriki too. He flew across the floor of the woods, smiling slightly at the crisp, fresh morning air. He and the Kyuubi had decided to go to Uzumaki first, where they'd wait for Gaara's 10 days to pass. It would give the blonde some time to familiarize himself with the place, and to see if it was actually inhabitable. After all, aside from learning about sealing, Uzumaki would be the perfect place to hide. No one would think to look for him there. He hadn't even known it existed until the Kyuubi told him, and no one in the village knew that he had been talking to the fox, so as far as the village knew, there was no possible way for Naruto to know about Uzumaki and his heritage. "Hey, Kyuubi. What, brat? Can you tell me more about my family later?" The fox was silent for a few moments, but Naruto was beginning to recognize this as the fox thinking something over, not trying to avoid answering. "Fine," he huffed, "but not until we get to Uzumaki. You'll have enough questions once we get there. I'm going to enjoy a quiet trip while I still can." Naruto ducked his head, grinning. He couldn't fault the fox for that one, although that did remind him of something. "Okay, but I have one question before I stop bothering you." He heard a groan, then the Kyuubi snapped, "What?" Naruto continued, unconcerned by the fox's tone. "Do you have a name? It doesn't feel right to just call you Kyuubi, or fox, or whatever." The fox was quickly becoming Naruto's greatest confidant, and sure, that didn't take much, but he didn't think this tentative camaraderie was something anyone would have expected, least of all the two of them. But that didn't change the fact that Naruto trusted the fox. He didn't think he could say he liked the fox yet, but he knew he was well on his way there. The now familiar pause stretched on longer than usual, and Naruto held himself back from asking again, trying to be patient. Instead, he focused on the leaves rushing by him and the dappled sunlight showering him with warmth. Then, more quietly than Naruto had ever heard, the Kyuubi finally spoke. "Kurama. My name is Kurama." Chapter 2. Amino Iruka was the first to notice. The academy teacher hadn't seen the blonde genin since Kakashi brought him and Sasuke back, and in the beginning that was nothing out of the ordinary. For the first few days, he had told himself the boy was probably in the hospital, either recovering or visiting Sasuke with the rest of his team. As more time passed, though, he felt more and more uneasy. Something wasn't right, he could feel it. And when he went to visit Sasuke and Choji himself, wanting to see with his own eyes that the boys would be alright, Naruto was nowhere to be found. The teacher started asking around, talking to Junin senseis and genin, but every single one of them said they hadn't seen Naruto recently. He wondered at the feeling of dread rising in his chest. Now, Iruka hadn't gone to Naruto's apartment yet. He had thought that maybe the boy needed a little time to himself after the harrowing experience he and his friends had just been through. But something about that rang false to him, so although he wanted to respect the boy's privacy, he eventually gave in. "I'll just check on him, see if he needs anything," Iruka reasoned as he climbed the stairs leading to the blonde's apartment. "If he wants to get out of the apartment, we could go to Ichiraku's. I haven't talked to him in too long." When he knocked on the door, the sound seemed hollow, like the noise was echoing through the small space. A minute passed, then two. Iruka frowned, worry gnawing at him more insistently than ever. He hadn't even heard anything shifting around, or any other noises to indicate Naruto was inside at all. The silence was almost eerie. He reached out again and hesitated, then nodded to himself and twisted the doorknob instead of knocking again. To his surprise, the door was unlocked, and it swung open easily. The academy teacher stepped inside, and as soon as he did, he knew that Naruto wasn't there. It was too quiet, too still. The emptiness was almost tangible. Normally he would have turned around and left, continuing his search elsewhere, but for some reason he couldn't get himself to walk out that door. Iruka took a deep breath and headed to Naruto's bedroom. Looking inside, the first thing he noticed was how uncharacteristically clean it was. He had expected clothes on the floor and blankets strewn all over the bed. He had expected the room to reflect his student's energetic, chaotic nature, not for it to be practically spotless. Wait, his gaze was drawn back to the bed. Something was missing. Years ago, back when Naruto couldn't have been older than 7, Genma and Raida had mentioned to him that while they were Anbu tasked with watching Naruto, they had given him a little stuffed fox. They couldn't do much for the boy, but they tried whenever they could. And Naruto had loved it. He had told Iruka about it countless times, eyes sparkling as he spoke of the nameless Anbu shinobi who showed him more kindness than the rest of the village combined. So where was it? And the more he took in the details of the room, the more he realized what was missing. Then it hit him. The room wasn't clean. It was empty. His thoughts were all but confirmed when he saw a flash of orange through the crack of a drawer left slightly open. The jumpsuit. That bright orange jumpsuit Naruto always wore, so for him to stand out and own the fact that people were looking at him anyway. It was still there, yes. But nothing else was in the drawers. Iruka's heart was starting to pound, eyes widening in realization. They had to find him. He needed to talk to Tsunade now. Kakashi had to force himself to continue breathing steadily, but he couldn't hide the near panic in his eyes as he stood before Tsunade, Iruka, and Shikaku on either side. Gone? His voice was hoarse, broken. When was the last time anyone saw him? If it had only been a day or so, Kakashi and his pack would be able to find him, would be able to follow him, and bring him back. As far as we can tell, he was last seen 4 days ago, Shikaku said gravely. The Junin felt winded, like Shikaku had punched him in the chest. 4 days. 4 days his student had been gone, and he hadn't noticed. How did I let this happen? And how did it happen? Kakashi straightened, gaze firmly locked on Tsunade once more. Was he taken? He asked shortly. Iruka was the one who answered him. So many things were missing: no clothes, no wallet, nothing. But there were no signs of a struggle. He broke off, looking up at the ceiling to avoid anyone's eyes, and probably to fight off tears. I think he left willingly, he said at last, voice cracking on the last word. And damn, if Kakashi thought the news that Naruto was gone was bad, it was nothing compared to being told that his student, Minato's son, had wanted to leave. Tsunade took over for the overwhelmed teacher. What we don't know is where he's going. And we don't know why. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, using annoyance to mask the pain and fear in her eyes. The kid was doing great. He was working hard, and he succeeded in bringing Sasuke home, a mission that most probably thought was a lost cause. He seemed happy. What happened? Kakashi shifted uneasily, but Iruka spoke up before the silver-haired man could think of anything to say, any answer to give. Naruto has never truly been as happy as he acts, Iruka said quietly. When Tsunade waited for him to go on, he smiled sadly at the other 3 shinobi. Even before he graduated from the academy, he had already been rejected again and again by shinobi and civilians alike, and that showed no signs of truly changing, even now. Could you be that bright, that happy, when it seems like everyone hates you? He shook his head, correcting himself. No, when everyone does hate you. He knew nothing good would come of lashing out, but he was always being watched no matter what he did. People were always talking about him, both behind his back and to his face. He thought that if he could get their attention by wearing bright clothes, by being exuberant and pranking everyone in sight, at least he could feel like he had at least a little control over what the villagers were saying about him. He couldn't make people like him, but he'd much rather they hate him for pranking them than because he's the demon fox. Shikaku hummed thoughtfully. In that case, it would be safe to assume that something happened that was drastic enough to convince him that he could never be happy if he stayed here. He's tried for years, but everyone has a breaking point. It looks like Naruto finally hit his, the man said gravely. But he had his team, Kakashi thought, feeling incredibly lost. And he had just brought Sasuke back. He had just pulled the team back together again. And now he's gone? How could this happen again? Iruka grimaced, and only then did Kakashi realize he had spoken his thoughts aloud. The teacher shifted his weight uncomfortably, fixing his gaze on a spot over Kakashi's shoulder rather than looking him in the eye. There might have been a few more problems in your team than you realized, he said quietly. Kakashi narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? He tried not to sound defensive, but was largely unsuccessful. He couldn't help it. How badly had he fucked up this time? Iruka hesitated, still unable to look Kakashi in the eye. He did leave one thing in his room, he said, reaching into his bag. The silver-haired man's heart fell. Whatever was coming, Kakashi knew he wasn't going to like it. And when Iruka handed him Naruto's picture of Team 7, his cracked and fragile heart finally shattered. The only thought spiraling endlessly through his mind was, I failed. Sasuke was more than ready to get out of the hospital. He was tired of constant checkups, he was tired of just laying here, and he was tired of Sakura's constant presence. The pink-haired girl usually showed up right when visiting hours began, and only left when visiting hours ended, or when Ino came on occasion to drag her out for a few hours. Tsunade-sama had told him he'd be released within the next few days, though. He couldn't hide his blatant relief upon hearing the news. But what now? After getting out of the hospital, what was Sasuke going to do? Kakashi-sensei and Tsunade had talked about removing the cursed seal Orochimaru put on him. Some part of him knew that he wanted to get rid of it, that the uncontrollable rage that had fueled him was not the kind of power he wanted. But he was still out there. Still just waiting for Sasuke to finally come and face him. And he just didn't know what to do. He didn't want to be in Konoha, he didn't want to see anyone there, but now that he had thought about it more, he wasn't quite sure he wanted to go to Orochimaru anymore, either. Especially since he had felt something uncomfortably close to guilt when he learned of the injuries the others got while trying to bring him back. What do I want more? That was the problem, he didn't know. He wanted to achieve his mission and enact his vengeance. He needed to, but he was starting to wonder, was Orochimaru's power worth the lives Konoha had almost lost on his behalf? It would be the easiest option, a guaranteed road to power, but for the first time, he was considering whether or not it was right. He wouldn't say he was especially close to anyone on the team that came after him, but they were still the people who had been in his classes, his teams, for years. Did he actually care about them? Sasuke took a shaky breath. He couldn't care about anything other than revenge. He needed to stay focused. He didn't have time for friendships or precious people, or whatever everyone called them. So then why could he detect the tiniest spark of warmth when Sakura came in, day after day, consistently making sure that he was all right, all because she cared about him? Maybe attachments were inevitable, but that's part of why I left in the first place, the boy thought, frustrated. I could tell I was starting to get attached to my team, and I couldn't let them distract me. I needed to break the bonds holding me here. Orochimaru wouldn't be my friend, nor would Kabuto. They would be a means to an end, and they all knew it. But now he was back, however unwillingly. And, to his horror, he had come to realize that part of why he was so angry with his peers with Naruto was that he wasn't sure he could bring himself to leave again. He had pulled together the determination and focus necessary to ignore anything tying him to this village once before. Knowing they would always come after him changed things. They had fought the Sound Four just to get to him, just to try to change his mind. Naruto had gone as far as to fight him, so he couldn't leave, so the boy could bring him back to Konoha. Because, of course, Naruto had always been ridiculously determined in a way that rivaled Sasuke's own stubbornness. It always came back to Naruto, and Sasuke hated it. Hated that, during their fight, part of him had wanted his teammate to win. He was the one person who could make Sasuke's determination waver, and he wasn't sure he could forgive that. Everything he had told Naruto in his fit of anger had been true, to an extent. Naruto was holding Sasuke back because he tied him to the team and to the village. He didn't want to be around the blonde because the more time he spent with him and his other teammates, the harder it became to visualize leaving. He didn't want the boy's help. Accepting his team's help, letting them fight alongside him, would only prove he was weak. Wouldn't it? He and Sakura both jumped slightly when the door to his hospital room swung open. Sasuke turned to ask what the nurses needed now, and stopped short when he saw Kakashi-sensei standing in the doorway instead. And he was incredibly expressive for someone who covers up 3/4 of their face. That is to say, he looked awful. Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked uneasily, exchanging a nervous glance with Sasuke in a rare moment of solidarity. When their sensei didn't move, Sakura spoke again. Kakashi-sensei? Is something wrong? After several more seconds of that strange stillness, Kakashi walked to one of the chairs near the two kids and sat down heavily. Now that he was closer, Sasuke could identify the emotion in his eyes. He looked the same way Sasuke looked when Itachi betrayed him. He looked lost, and there was an undercurrent of panic in his eyes. Sometimes Sasuke still saw that expression when looking in a mirror. And that, more than anything else, was what convinced Sasuke that something was horribly wrong. But they had been through so much, the four of them, and nothing had ever made Kakashi-sensei react like this. Not Zabuza and Haku, not Orochimaru, not even bringing Sasuke back to Konoha with Naruto. Wait, is this about Naruto? He asked tentatively. What mess did he get himself into this time? Sakura was clearly trying to lighten the mood, since the mocking tone she usually used with her blonde teammate was completely absent for once, but it backfired when the silver-haired man flinched violently at her words. The kids exchanged another glance, this time laced with alarm. What the fuck happened to Naruto? Kakashi took a deep breath, composing himself long enough to say, Naruto left Konoha. Sasuke understood those three words separately, but together, that made no sense. What? He asked sharply. What do you mean, he left? How did someone get far enough into Konoha to take him? After all, the Sound Four had a hard enough time getting to Sasuke, and the village was on high alert after Sasuke's attempt to go to Orochimaru. He couldn't see how someone could have taken him, but that would mean, it appears that he left voluntarily, Kakashi said, voice hoarse but finally steady as he gazed at his remaining students. Sakura couldn't stifle her gasp fast enough, hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock. But what about his dream of being Hokage? She cried. What about the team? Why would he want to leave? Their Junin-sensei just shook his head wearily, drawing a hand over his face. You know how Naruto is treated by the village. He distracted himself by talking about being Hokage, but he couldn't escape everything the civilians would say about him, or do to him. But what does that have to do with us? Sasuke's chest tightened the slightest bit when he finally put it all together. Did he leave because of what I said to him? The thought was an uncomfortable one, but it was quickly buried by the anger and frustration that seemed to be his constant companions. He couldn't handle it, so he ran away? Sasuke hadn't necessarily meant to make his tone so derisive, but he didn't correct himself. Well, that's what happened, isn't it? He reasoned with a frown. He scoffed. Of course he couldn't. When he met Kakashi's eyes once more, the man was staring at him like he was seeing Sasuke for the first time. He looked like he had been struck by lightning, realizing something, though Sasuke couldn't say what. Their sensei swallowed hard, took one more deep breath, and stood. Well, I'm going out to find him. I'm bringing Genma and Raito with me. We're some of the fastest shinobi in the village. We'll catch up with him. He tried to inject forced cheer into his voice, but he really didn't need to. Sakura and Sasuke could see right through the obvious facade. The man left immediately after, but for the first time, Sakura didn't immediately start chattering in his ear. Instead, they looked at each other, Sasuke with shock, Sakura with anxiety. When Sakura spoke, it was hardly above a whisper. Is this our fault? No, Sasuke snapped immediately. The Dobi chose to leave. That has nothing to do with us. But he couldn't help the small tendril of fear that curled in his heart, whispering, but what if it does? Sasuke wasn't sure he wanted to think about that. He didn't want to know the answer. Though he'd never admit it, Sasuke was scared of what the answer might be. Training was on hold for the moment, since Asuma-sensei wanted to wait for Choji to heal properly before starting up again. Normally Shikamaru would be ecstatic about all the time that had just opened up, but today wasn't a normal day. What did you want to talk about, Shikamaru? Ino sat down beside him with a confused frown. To be fair, Shikamaru had been rather cryptic. He had shown up at her window, tapping on it until she let him in, only to tell her to meet him in their normal training field in 15 minutes. Then he left. Shikamaru could see why his teammate would be confused. He sighed heavily. My dad had to go see the Hokage this morning, but there was something different about it. He was in a rush, so it wasn't a scheduled meeting. So, a few years ago, or even a few months ago, that one word would have been dripping with condescension. Instead, she sounded curious. She was prompting him to explain. It was Shikamaru's turn to frown, not at his blonde teammate, but at the situation in general. Troublesome, he thought wearily. He came back to grab a few files and things he needed, talking to my mom about what was happening. They didn't notice I was there. Shikamaru, your stealth training is going really well if you can hide from your dad. Ino exclaimed. The brunette snorted, but sobered quickly. Ino, focus. He said Naruto is gone. It took her a few seconds to process the statement, just as it had when Shikamaru first heard it. He what? Shikamaru had been expecting a shriek, but instead her voice dropped to a frantic whisper. When? Where? Are we getting him back? With each question, she was subconsciously leaning closer to Shikamaru, watching him like a hawk. Shikamaru moved slightly to the side. Sure, Ino was his teammate, but personal space, come on, and turned so he was facing her. No one knows where he is or where he's going, he said, serious in a way he rarely was. He liked Naruto, even if friends were troublesome and he didn't often admit it. But Dad said that no one took him. Naruto chose to leave. Ino gasped, eyes widening. She shook her head slightly. No way, she said quietly, stunned. Why? What on earth happened? And, well, Shikamaru didn't have an answer for what specific event finally drove Naruto away. But he had his hypotheses. He took a deep breath before returning Ino's gaze once again. He left 4 days ago, Ino, he said gravely. 4 days, and no one noticed until this morning. This time, Ino was completely speechless. He watched the pain flood her eyes. Maybe he shouldn't have told her, but Shikamaru needed to talk to someone about it. Then came the guilt. She started, looking around as if the blonde himself would just appear out of thin air. No one? She whispered. Shikamaru nodded shortly. No one, he confirmed. After a few moments of silence he said, I get it, why he left. Another reason Shikamaru chose to talk to Ino rather than anyone else. Ino was smart. She knew what Shikamaru was implying. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a weak laugh. That's so fucked up. I guess I really can't blame him, then. He was so alone, and we didn't even notice. She flexed her hands a few times, then forced herself to her feet, white-knuckled. Okay, well, I need to go hit something. I'll see you at the hospital later. Shikamaru let himself bask in the silence for a few minutes, but their training ground wasn't the most comfortable place to relax, so soon enough he got to his feet with a groan. He was walking past another training ground when a flash of light blue caught his attention. It was Neji, obviously working on his proficiency with the Byakugan. He spun with grace and ease, moving from a rotation to a fluid attack in an instant. But that wasn't exactly what held Shikamaru's attention. Neji looked, the only way Shikamaru could think to describe it was lighter. He looked like the weight of the world had just lifted off his shoulders, and he could finally breathe again. Shikamaru even saw the flash of a smile as he practiced. And wasn't that a sight, Hyuga Neji actually smiling. A small smile, to be sure, but it was definitely there. Why now? The only explanation Shikamaru could think of was that he was making progress with Hiyashi-sama and Hinata, since their relationship was so strained before the Chunin exams. With that, he shrugged off his curiosity and continued walking, hands in his pockets. Idly, he wondered if he'd find a good cloud-watching spot by the academy. Unfortunately, Shikamaru was mistaken. No, amidst all the pain and heartbreak and guilt surrounding him in the wake of Naruto's flight, Hyuga Neji waited patiently in the eye of the storm. He calmly watched the chaos around him, watched as the broken village started to recognize its mistakes at last, but it was too little, too late. They could look for him all they wanted, but it wasn't going to change a thing. Naruto was gone, he wasn't coming back. And soon enough, Neji would join him. Chapter 3. In hindsight, Naruto realized it probably would have been helpful to specify where he and Gaara were going to meet once Gaara left his village. I'll meet you at Tsuna wasn't exactly his most thought-out plan. In my defense, a lot happened that day, he thought, trekking through the sand towards the village in the distance. At least he could see the village now, that meant he was at least sort of close. Relax, Kurama grumbled, but there was little bite in his tone. You two can feel each other to an extent, because Shukaku and I recognize each other's chakra. You'll find each other, so stop worrying about it. That was easier said than done. Worry had been his constant companion for the past 10 days. He was always on guard, and whenever a sudden sound shattered the quiet in which he traveled, he half expected Konoha shinobi to burst out of nowhere and drag him back to the village. And that's a valid fucking concern, Kurama, so don't tell me not to worry about it. Kurama huffed a small laugh. Fine, fine. His voice sobered when he said, you're right that this is dangerous. Suna is allied with Konoha, and you and Gaara are Jinchurikis on the run. Being cautious while traveling is a good thing. If you weren't, I'd be far more concerned. And annoyed. Oh, Naruto didn't really have anything to say to that. The fox was right, after all. Hopefully when they got back to Uzushio, it needed a lot of work, obviously, but once he set foot in the remains of the village, it was like he could truly breathe for the first time in his life. Even in ruins, the city radiated safety somehow. His head snapped up when familiar chakra reached out to him, and his mouth stretched into an excited grin. And a few seconds later, a small figure appeared at the top of the sand dune in front of him. Naruto broke into a run. Gaara, knowing exactly what was coming, just braced himself. Even so, the redhead stumbled back a step or two when the blonde slammed into him, arms winding around his friend. Hi, Gaara, he said quietly. Gaara hugged Naruto back much faster this time, already growing used to Naruto's tactile nature. Hello, Naruto, he replied, the hint of a smile in his voice. He pulled back and met Naruto's eyes, and neither gaze held even a hint of doubt. Where are we going? He asked, not demanding, simply curious. Naruto's smile brightened once more, and he turned so that he was facing the way he came. We're going to Uzushio, he said, anxiety finally settling for the moment, at least. The redhead nodded, swiftly accepting Naruto's words. The blonde wasn't sure he even knew what Uzushio was. But he trusted Naruto's judgment, and he would treasure the trust Gaara placed in him. When Naruto looked back at his friend, a tiny smile had finally appeared on his face as Naruto's friend said, then let's go. And like a broken pot being fixed, a piece of his broken life finally started to slide back into place. Naruto hadn't realized how much he appreciated Gaara's stoicism until the redhead stepped into Uzushio for the first time. It wasn't like the blonde had expected the city to be in good condition. When he got there, it was literally destroyed. After all, but hearing about Uzushio couldn't prepare anyone to actually see the village ruins, in Naruto's opinion. It was horrible to see how complete the annihilation of his family was, but in spite of all that, Uzushio was probably the most beautiful place he had ever seen. When they arrived, Gaara had noted with some satisfaction that Uzushio was hidden very well. The village was located in a valley, completely surrounded by tall hills. That more than anything else was what convinced the two boys that they would stay there. Of course, this was Naruto's heritage, and he wanted to look for sealing materials so he could go back for Neji as soon as possible, but the valley gave them peace of mind. They were hidden. They were safe. A beautiful river ran through the center of the village ruins, steadily flowing underneath the remains of bridges that once crossed it. The clear, swirling water was unlike anything he had ever seen. But watching the river inevitably led to the ruins themselves. Debris was everywhere, walls and roofs of every building having fallen or caved in on themselves long ago. Not a single structure was still standing. The rubble looked more like the aftermath of an explosion than an attack by another village, frankly. But many of the pieces were still large enough that Naruto could see the swirling patterns that adorned them. Some were parts of seals, and some weren't, but the graceful designs warmed something in his chest. Nothing is ever completely lost, Kurama said quietly. Naruto smiled and ducked his head. You're right, he replied, and I know that. But Kurama, are you telling me that you think two 12-year-olds can rebuild an entire village on our own? Are you saying you can't? Kurama challenged without missing a beat. The blonde's smile softened, and he traced his hand along one of the broken seals found in the destruction around him. Of course I do, we can do anything. But you're a grump most of the time, so I'm a bit surprised to hear you say it, he said, unable to hold back an audible laugh. Gaara didn't react at all, though. That was another benefit of being here with another Jinchuriki. He didn't need to explain his conversations with Kurama. When he did mention them, the redhead had simply given him an understanding nod, and that was the end of it. It was pretty nice to feel understood for once. Kurama huffed, offended. No respect, he grumbled. Little brat. Naruto's smile didn't falter in the slightest. But you like me anyway. Kurama didn't directly reply to that comment, but his silence was a confirmation in and of itself. That's not why I brought this up though, he said. His next words were grating. They sounded like they were almost forced out of him. I can help, if you let me. Naruto's brain stopped. So did his feet. Gaara sent him an inquisitive look, but when Naruto waved for him to go on, he shrugged and left without protest, leaving the blonde to process the metaphorical bombshell that Kurama had dropped on him. Sure, the two were friendly with one another, even if Kurama showed he cared through caustic comments and rarely through sincerity. His intelligent response to the fox was, "What?" Kurama huffed impatiently. "You're really going to make me say it again?" he grumbled. "It wouldn't kill you to be nice to me sometimes," Naruto said with a shrug. He stood in silence for another few moments before saying, "Really, though, what do you mean?" The fox sighed heavily but relented soon enough. "The way your seal is designed right now is limiting your access to my chakra. Obviously that's exactly what Konoha wanted, after all, but that means the seal is making it almost impossible for us to truly work together. Honestly, the amount of my power you can access now is pitiful." "But how would accessing your chakra change?" Naruto broke off, answering his own question before he could complete the thought. "Oh, you could help make the seals work and help us build and stuff. I'd prefer to sound less like a tool and more like a partner in this mess, but I suppose you've got the right idea." Naruto winced. "Right, sorry. Yeah, having your help would be awesome. And I'm sure it would be nice for you to have a little more freedom with what my seal lets you do, huh?" Kurama blinked, seeming surprised at the blonde's perceptiveness. "It would," he said quietly. "We won't be able to change anything until you learn more about seals, though, so finding out if this place still has fuinjutsu libraries will have to come first." Naruto nodded easily, putting his hands in his pockets and beginning to walk forward again. So much about their new life revolved around sealing. Why didn't the other villages use it more? Clearly it was powerful and pretty important. And yet Uzushio was the only village that had been renowned for its sealing abilities. Was that why they were attacked? Kurama hadn't told him much about why Uzushio was destroyed yet. "Naruto." The blonde blinked and refocused on Gaara, who now stood in front of him calmly. "I think I found something." Naruto perked up, a smile lighting his face. "Great," he said, bouncing excitedly. "Where is it?" Instead of verbally responding, Gaara turned and led Naruto through the ruins of the village, picking his way through the fallen buildings. Finally, they reached what seemed to be the center of the former village. The fallen building here was much larger than any of the others the pair had passed so far. Maybe this is where the cage worked, Naruto mused, letting his eyes wander over the scene. He realized, however, that Gaara hadn't stopped on the building's periphery. Naruto hurried to catch up to him, and soon enough he saw what Gaara had wanted to show him. It was faint, but Naruto could see a seal etched into the ground. It was precise and well done, as Naruto expected all of the seals here were, but the depth of the marks was inconsistent, so it looked like it had been drawn hastily. "I haven't seen any other seals in the ground like this," Gaara commented, regarding the mark with curiosity. It looked like there were some in the building's foundations, but nothing carved into the ground like this. Naruto hadn't, either. "Kurama, do you have any idea what this is?" Kurama was quiet for a few moments before he responded, and in that time Gaara slipped away again, exploring their new home once more. "I don't know for sure," Kurama admitted. "I've been sealed inside uzumakis for generations, so I'd say I'm fairly knowledgeable about sealing, but there's much I don't know." "That's all right," Naruto replied easily. "Any ideas, though?" This time, the fox's answer came much more quickly. "It looks like some sort of lock," he said, and Naruto could hear the frown in his voice. Apparently the fox didn't like not having all the answers. "Okay, a lock. But locking what? It was carved into the ground, what could anyone be hiding there? And how can they unlock it?" He crouched next to the seal to take a closer look. It couldn't have been more than half a foot across, so Naruto was almost surprised that Gaara had noticed it at all. But as he visually traced the lines and curves in the seal, his eyes widened minutely. I'm not sure if this actually matters or not," Naruto began, "but does the middle of the seal look like that swirl pattern on Kakashi-sensei's flak jackets?" "You're right, Kit." Naruto had to quickly stifle his excitement at the words. He could probably count on one hand the number of times anyone had told him he was right about something. "That symbol doesn't belong to Konoha, though. It's the Uzumaki clan crest, and it's the basis for the symbol on Uzushio's Hite Atesh." Naruto frowned, confused. "If the symbol is Uzushio's or my family's, then why does Konoha use it?" "It's a long story, brat," Kurama rumbled. "I'll tell you once we've found somewhere to settle around here." Naruto wasn't exactly happy with the response, but he just sighed and let it go without complaint. For now, the seal. The differences between the Uzumaki crest and the Uzushio symbol are subtle, but they're there. This here looks like it's using the Uzumaki clan crest. Naruto's eyes widened, an odd smile spreading across his face. Our family's symbol is its own seal? More like part of a seal, Kurama corrected. A way to tie seals to specific people, possibly. Oh. Naruto carefully traced his fingers over the seal, starting at the outer edge and making his way in. So only an Uzumaki can open this? Potentially. Naruto shrugged. That's good enough for me. Might as well try it, right? It's not like we have any other ideas right now. He faltered, sitting back on his heels and hooking his arms around his knees. But what do I do, Kurama? Is this a blood thing, like with summoning? The fox shifted restlessly as he thought through the boy's question. Try channeling chakra into it first, he suggested. No need to get blood everywhere if chakra will do. It's not like summoning takes a lot of blood, Naruto thought, vaguely amused. He knew Kurama was right, though. Chakra would be a lot simpler, or it would be if he could manage to control it. He had gotten much better at chakra control since leaving the academy, but he definitely wouldn't say he was good at it yet. Focusing hard on everything he knew about chakra control, he carefully let some chakra spill into the seal. More chakra escaped than he would have liked, but it was still much less than the tsunami that would have flooded the seal if he had attempted this several months ago. For a moment, nothing happened, leaving Naruto and Kurama to wait in companionable silence. Naruto was just about to suggest using blood when the center of the seal began to crumble. Naruto shot to his feet and stumbled back a few steps, not wanting to get in the way of whatever was happening. More and more of the ground crumbled, stopping once there was a sizable hole in the ground. It was probably wider across than Naruto was tall. Well, whatever the blonde had expected to happen, he wasn't sure this was what he had in mind. Glee began to bubble up inside his chest, and Kurama huffed in exasperation at the boy's enthusiasm. Please be a secret tunnel, please be a secret tunnel, he thought, quickly kneeling at the edge of the hole. It was a secret tunnel. Yay! He very nearly jumped in without a second thought, but stopped when he realized that he'd probably worry his friend a lot if Gaara tried looking for Naruto and the blonde was gone. That in mind, Naruto stood and looked around, and could only just make out Gaara's red hair a short ways off. He bounced over to his friend excitedly, the redhead looking back at him when he heard the blonde's approach. That seal you found was hiding a tunnel, he said without preamble, grinning widely at his friend. Want to go check it out? Only the minute widening of the redhead's eyes betrayed Gaara's surprise. After a few moments, though, his face softened into a small, if bemused smile. Might as well, he replied with a shrug. It's what we're here for, after all. Naruto didn't need to hear anything further, spinning around and making his way back to the hole he had uncovered. Gaara crouched next to him, examining the newly uncovered passage. How far down does it go? The redhead asked, glancing up at Naruto. I can't see the bottom from here. The blonde frowned. He hadn't thought of that. It was definitely a good idea to grab Gaara first, he thought. Kurama snorted. You think? Ignoring the fox, Naruto glanced around thoughtfully, eyes finally landing on one of the smaller pieces of rubble near Naruto's feet. This wouldn't be an exact measurement by any means, but it could give them a vague idea of what to expect, maybe. With a shrug, he picked up a fist-sized piece, held it over the hole, and dropped it in. They heard it hit the floor almost immediately, and Gaara commented, not very deep then, I guess. Well, that was enough planning for Naruto. Without another word, he jumped in after the dropped debris. He hit the ground lightly and fell into a crouch, blinking to try to adjust his eyes to the diminished light. Before he could, however, he heard clothes rustle as Gaara got up and stepped away. He was just about to call out to his friend, to ask him where he was going, when the redhead in question reappeared, finally dropping down next to him. Before Naruto had the chance to ask him where he had gone, a flurry of sparks lit up a torch in Gaara's hand. Ah, light. Didn't think of that, either. Obviously, Kurama replied dryly, greatly entertained by the blonde's short-sightedness. Can you see in the dark? Gaara asked curiously. Naruto choked on a laugh. This was one of the things he loved about his friend. Gaara was completely sincere when asking these types of questions. If Naruto said yes, the redhead would believe him. That wasn't to say that he was naive. He just held Naruto's words in high esteem. Sometimes the level of trust the redhead had in him was a little scary. Geez, hopefully I deserve it. No, I can't, Naruto responded, taking a moment to look at the tunnel, now that the fireglow made it possible to see their surroundings. He smiled sheepishly at Gaara, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. I didn't think about how dark it was before jumping in. Oh, was Gaara's simple response. He followed the lines of the tunnel and hummed thoughtfully. It looks like the hallway ends just up there, he said, starting to walk down the pathway. Maybe he shouldn't have been, but Naruto was honestly shocked that his friend was letting go of Naruto's mistake without making fun of him for it. Is that sad? Yes, Kurama snapped. Rather than responding to the fox, Naruto shrugged and walked after Gaara, tracing his fingers along the walls and enjoying the soothing coolness he felt. Gaara was right. The pathway wasn't long, and only once they reached the end of the hallway did they notice the unobtrusive door to their right. Naruto's eyes almost skipped over it entirely, as it lacked any sort of doorknob or lock. The blonde probably would have missed it if not for the small seal in the center of the door. It looked extremely similar to the other seal Naruto had unlocked. They could have been identical for all Naruto knew. He could admit that he hadn't really tried to commit the seal to memory the first time around. Now that he was seeing it again, though, he tried his best to memorize it. If they had already encountered it twice in such a short amount of time, maybe they would find others just like it. At least I have an idea of how to open it this time, Naruto reasoned, stepping forward and placing his palm flat on the seal. He took a deep breath, once again trying to rein in his massive chakra reserves, and let some chakra into the seal. He felt a thrill of excitement when he realized that it was a bit easier to control it this time. Not much, but it was enough to be noticeable. Thankfully, this seal worked just like the first. The only difference was that instead of the door crumbling, it simply swung in to let them through. The blonde entered without hesitation, Gaara only a step behind him. When Gaara's torch lit the room, Naruto couldn't contain an odd gasp. His eyes widened as the pair was met with shelves upon shelves of books and scrolls, with several large tables strewn across the room. A smile started to grow on the blonde's face. He didn't have to open a single scroll to know that this was what they had been looking for. This was where his journey in sealing would begin. He turned back to Gaara, who was watching him with a small, fond smile. Well, that was easier than I expected, he commented, clear eyes leaving Naruto's to roam over the large space. I thought we'd be looking for longer. Naruto burst into laughter, filled with delight and relief in equal measures. So much is still here, he breathed. He couldn't seem to look away from the shelves. This is my link to my family. There could be more, too, Gaara pointed out, stepping up next to the blonde and glancing over at him. Maybe the people who lived here all locked away their books and things when they realized they were being attacked. I'm sure they didn't want the other villages to steal their clan and village secrets. Naruto's mind was racing, endless possibilities swirling through his thoughts. He had assumed that they would need to rebuild from scratch, that everything would be completely destroyed. But Gaara was right. Just how much survived because the invaders couldn't get past the individual barriers the people of Uzumaki had left behind? Were there more untouched libraries? What if there were homes that had been preserved, or at least basements? The blonde threw an arm around his friend's shoulders enthusiastically. You're right, he breathed. We're just getting started. Naruto, are you in here? The blonde didn't even look up from the seal he was drawing with painstaking care, and his motions didn't falter. Yeah, he said distractedly. Gaara huffed in amusement, sliding into a chair next to him and peering over his shoulder at his current project. The seal will still be there if you look away for a second, you know, he said, lightly teasing his friend. Naruto let out a bark of laughter, finishing one last curved line before pausing to look over at the redhead. Yeah, but so will you, he replied cheekily, grinning. Gaara rolled his eyes, carefully waiting until Naruto had pushed his work out of the way before he nudged the boy with his shoulder. Shukaku helped me clear out another section of the village today, he said with a small smile. Have you found anything else on how they used fuinjutsu in their buildings? Is that what you're working on? The pair had slowly but surely been clearing away the wreckage that had greeted them at their arrival. Now, 6 months later, they were almost done, almost all of the village's foundation visible once more. Of course, they had only been able to move so quickly because they hadn't tried building anything yet. They were focusing on one thing at a time. They also couldn't have worked this quickly without help from Shukaku and Kurama. Upon discovering Uzushio's hidden sealing techniques and materials, Naruto immediately jumped headfirst into Biju seals. It probably would have been better to start with the basics and work his way up instead, but he had agreed to adjust his seal enough to give Kurama more freedom, and to make his relationship with Naruto one of equals, rather than that of jailer and prisoner. He refused to waste any time in fulfilling that promise. It had taken time, it had taken months, but 5 months after they arrived, Naruto succeeded in changing his seal. On his first try, too. And yes, Kurama had chewed him out for his recklessness, telling him that he should have at least tried the seal on paper before trying it on himself. Personally, Naruto wasn't nearly as concerned. It had worked, hadn't it? And for all his grumbling, Naruto knew that Kurama was pleased that Naruto had figured out their seals so quickly. Fuinjutsu just made sense to Naruto. It had been exhilarating to finally find something he could excel at. He didn't think that had ever happened before. He was the dead last in their academy class, after all, and that hadn't changed when they became genin. But this, Naruto could do. In this, at least, Naruto could thrive. Maybe that was why he could actually focus for more than a few minutes at a time. School had been torture, it hadn't made any sense, and the teachers just got frustrated with him when he didn't understand something, and it was so boring. But Fuinjutsu was exciting. He actually enjoyed it. Besides, it was important, necessary, even that he learned sealing. Kurama and Neji, Gaara and Shukaku, they needed Naruto to learn Fuinjutsu. It gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't ever felt before. And so, the boy got caught up in his projects often enough that Gaara was used to tracking him down at night. He could usually be found in one of the libraries they had uncovered, and he often wouldn't know what time it was until Gaara showed up to tell him to go to sleep, that the seals would still be there in the morning. You'd be hopeless without Shukaku's brat, Kurama often told him, and the fox was right. Gaara helped rein in Naruto's tendencies to rush into situations without thinking, and helped him slow down when needed. But on the other hand, Naruto drew Gaara out of his shell, and they both helped each other through the bouts of self-loathing they were both prone to, after their similar treatment at the hands of their previous villages. They worked well together, and Naruto couldn't wait until Neji could join them, too. That was the project he was working on now. He had been torn, in the beginning. Part of him wanted to start on the Hyuga's seal immediately, but Gaara and Kurama had convinced him that the Biju seal should come first. Especially since Gaara's original seal was so unstable. But Naruto was working on it now, at least. Naruto smiled at his friend, shrugging good-naturedly. I was looking through some books earlier, but just now I was working on Neji's. Any progress? For Neji's seal? Yeah, but it'll still take a while. I'm learning this all out of order, so I'm piecing everything together as I go. It's a little weird, but I'll get there eventually. But I did find a couple of scrolls on Uzushio's architecture. I left them over on the other table. Shukaku thinks we can clear the rest of the ruins all at once, Gaara said, letting his gaze wander to the scrolls Naruto had indicated. So we should be finished with that within the next few days. Naruto's smile widened, and he bounced slightly in his seat. That's great, he exclaimed. In one of the books I was looking at, there were some maps and pictures and things of what Uzushio used to look like where all the buildings were and stuff. That would be good, the redhead mused quietly. I'd rather not have to draw up an entire town with nothing to use as a reference. I'm not exactly an expert in architecture. The pair sat in silence for a few moments, Naruto's thoughts racing while Gaara sat much more calmly. Do you think there are other Uzumaki out there? The redhead asked curiously. Naruto shrugged. I don't know, he said honestly. I mean, I didn't even know I had a clan until just before I left Konoha. But if anyone is still alive, I want to find them. Then we will, Gaara said simply. After a few more moments, he took a deep breath and stood, pushing away from the table. Come with me, he said, pulling the unresisting blonde from his seat and heading to the door. The sky is really clear tonight, let's go look at the stars. And as Naruto followed his friend out the door, he once again marveled at how free he felt. It was funny, really he'd never been around so few people, and yet he'd never felt less lonely. For once, he had everything he needed. Chapter 4. When the boys first arrived in Uzushio, only two problems really needed immediate attention: shelter and food. Of course, the shelter issue resolved itself as soon as Gaara and Naruto uncovered the first of the Fuinjutsu archives. They stayed there the first night, and just never really moved out. Sure, every now and then they mentioned that they would probably move once they actually started building things, but for now, this room was as good as any. Food was the more pressing issue by far. In their continued excavation of the village, Naruto and Gaara had found several storage rooms, but Uzushio had been destroyed far too long ago for anything there to still be edible. So in that way, the kids were starting from scratch. It was fortunate, really, that Naruto needed to go meet Gaara at Suna, rather than having them both leave from Konoha. As Naruto had traveled to meet his friend, he had come across a little town not too far from Uzushio. It was far enough away that Naruto didn't feel they were in danger of being discovered, but it was close enough that they could easily travel from one to the other in an hour or so. So trips to the town every couple of weeks became routine for the boys. In a rare moment of foresight, Naruto had remembered to bring all of his savings when he left Konoha, meager as they were. Gaara had brought his as well. His contribution was much more substantial. Truthfully, both boys were just relieved that they didn't need to scavenge for food, or steal anything from the vendors just to survive. Well, they weren't entirely sure what they were going to do when the money ran out, but considering how inexpensive the merchandise in the nearby town was, they had a while yet before they had to worry about that. Now that they had been coming consistently for 6 months, many of the villagers knew Gaara and Naruto by sight, if not by name. And today, like usual, familiar vendors cheerfully greeted the boys as they walked through the marketplace. They returned the greetings, of course, but they weren't paying quite as much attention as they usually would. Instead, they were locked in yet another conversation about seals. Neji's seal takes priority, of course, but do you think it would be possible to store food using seals? Gaara asked, a thoughtful frown on his face. If we could make that work, we could move a lot more between here and Uzushio in a single trip. Or if one of us needed to stay home for some reason, the other could come here alone and still manage to carry everything back. Naruto tilted his head consideringly. I don't see why not, he said with a casual shrug. At this point, I'm not sure there's anything seals can't do. I mean, it probably wouldn't be too different from a normal sealing scroll, right? Gaara huffed a small laugh. I have no idea. You're the Fuinjutsu expert here, not me. But Gaara, Naruto said, drawing his friend's name out petulantly. It's not like I'm even close to knowing everything about seals. Can someone really know everything about seals? Gaara asked absently, glancing down at the list he carried to make sure they didn't pass any of the stands they needed to go to. Exactly, Naruto replied indignantly, throwing his hands up in exaggerated frustration. The pair continued moving, but suddenly, out of nowhere, a voice behind them asked, excuse me, are you boys talking about Fuinjutsu? Now, Naruto wouldn't claim to have the best situational awareness, but he liked to think that he was at least fairly observant. But while he'd never admit it, he had not realized anyone was so close to them, and a violent jolt flashed through his body as he spun around, eyes wide. He instinctively tensed his muscles, feeling Gaara do the same next to him. But the girl in front of them definitely didn't look malicious. That didn't mean it was safe to let down their guard, but at least she hadn't made any sudden moves or tried to attack them yet. Maybe, Naruto said slowly, cautiously. Why? The girl before them was of fairly average height and build, and she was young. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than Naruto himself. But what really caught Naruto's attention was her chin-length hair. He had never seen such a distinctive, dark red color before. For some reason, Kurama seemed to stiffen slightly, watching the newcomer warily and eyeing the space between them. She smiled sheepishly and tucked a few strands of hair behind her ear. Oh, I'm sorry, she apologized. I didn't mean to barge in or anything. But practically no one talks about seals anymore. I've only ever been able to talk to my parents about it, since everyone else doesn't understand or just doesn't care. So I guess I just got a little excited, she finished with an open smile. Naruto glanced over at Gaara, the other boy meeting his gaze. His friend shrugged, and that was enough for Naruto to confirm that Gaara didn't find her threatening, either. He turned back to the girl, matching her cheerful smile with one of his own. That's okay. He doesn't really get seals either, he said, knocking his shoulder against his friend's good-naturedly. But he still listens to me when I ramble, he's the best. His smile brightened when he caught Gaara flushing out of the corner of his eye. It was true Gaara was one of the only true friends he had ever had, but Naruto still had fun springing the praise on him when he wasn't expecting it. Her eyes flicked between the two boys, smiles softening as she clasped her hands behind her back. "I'm Miyu," she said. "Uzumaki Miyu." Gaara and Naruto both froze instantly, too shocked to suppress their reactions. Naruto opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was completely speechless. "What the fuck? I thought she might be," Kurama mused. "You don't see hair that color on anyone but an Uzumaki. And you didn't think to warn me?" he asked indignantly. After a beat of silence, he thought, "Wait, then why am I blonde?" "Kurama, Gaara looks more like an Uzumaki than I do." Kurama started laughing, entirely unsympathetic. After a few moments, though, he reined in his amusement enough to say, "If it makes you feel better, Brad, you may not have the Uzumaki hair, but you got almost everything else from your mother." Oh, his mother Kushina, Kurama had told him. Uzumaki Kushina. He blinked when he heard Gaara's voice break the uneasy silence that had fallen over the trio. "I'm sorry, did you say Uzumaki?" Miyu was fidgeting uncomfortably, caught off guard by their dramatic reactions. "Yes," she replied, voice rising like a question at the end of her confirmation. "I know Gaara said we'd find the other Uzumakis, if they're out there, but I didn't really expect to wander into one without even trying," Naruto remarked. "Sorry, Naruto broke off, still uncharacteristically lost for words. He let out a disbelieving laugh, shaking his head. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto," he finally said. It wasn't much of an explanation, but by the widening of her eyes, it was good enough for now. "No fucking way," she breathed. "Oh my god, no wonder you were talking about Fuinjutsu. Oh, I'm so glad I stopped you." She gasped suddenly and straightened, scanning the market around them as if looking for someone. "Would you like to come meet my parents?" she asked excitedly. "Wow, they're going to be thrilled. I don't think they've seen another member of our family since Uzushio fell." She turned to Gaara, eyes shining. "Are you an Uzumaki as well?" Gaara shifted, eyes glued to the ground, and when Naruto noticed his friend's discomfort, he answered for the redhead. "Nah, this is Gaara," he said casually, swinging an arm around the boy's shoulders. He felt some of Gaara's tension release at the contact, and he smiled a little. "He's my best friend. We're basically family, though," he added. Miyu just shrugged. "Okay, I just asked because of the hair. You probably knew that already, though. But anyway, you didn't answer my first question. Want to come meet my parents?" Naruto thought through their options. He wasn't getting a single suspicious vibe from Miyu, and while that wasn't a foolproof way to make decisions, he was pretty good at reading people's intentions. She felt safe. Plus, she was family. Surely she'd be alright, right? Gaara seemed to have come to the same conclusion, because when Naruto glanced over at the other boy, he met the blonde's eyes with a single, solemn nod. They both knew they needed to stay on guard, though. Naruto turned back to Miyu, a bright smile lighting up his face. "Sounds good. Perfect. They should still be at the inn," she said, beginning to walk in that direction with the two boys at her heels. "I came out for a walk because we'd been inside all day and it was driving me insane." Naruto nodded enthusiastically. "I get like that too." "You do," Gaara agreed quietly. "Except when you're working on a seal. I think you forget time exists when you're working on one of your projects." "Well, yeah," Naruto conceded with a frown. "But I mean, when we're just sitting around or whatever. The storms we get sometimes are not fun." Miyu raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" she asked. "Are you not from here?" "We pass through fairly often, but I wasn't sure if you lived here or not." "I mean, it's not like I've met all of the locals or anything." The boys exchanged glances. Gaara was wearing a thoughtful expression, and Naruto finally said, "Later?" The question was directed at both Gaara and Miyu. He didn't want to mention Uzushio unless Gaara was okay with it. It was the other boy's home too. And he also wasn't sure he wanted to go through their story more than once. Once was more than enough. Gaara watched Naruto for a few more moments with his calm, measured eyes, and then he nodded. "That's not a problem," Miyu said, not sounding upset in the slightest. "Do I need to wait a bit until I unlock your tragic backstory?" she asked, throwing an amused glance over her shoulder. Naruto snorted, and even Gaara cracked a small smile. "Actually, yeah," Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his neck as he laughed. Tragic backstory? Well, that was one way to describe their situation. And rather than asking any more personal questions, Miyu turned the conversation to other topics, from the market to the weather, even telling a few stories about her and her parents. Apparently endless chatter runs in the family, Kurama said dryly. Kurama, you've been sealed inside Uzumakis for generations. You're just picking up on something like that now? It's not like I ever really interacted with the other Jinchuriki, Kurama grumbled. Mito and Kushina only spoke to me if I tried to get out, or they lost control of my chakra. Mito hardly spoke to me at all. Eventually I stopped paying attention. Well, that raised the question he'd had for months, but never got an answer. Why start talking to Naruto? Before he could even begin to think about it, let alone ask the fox, again. Miyu interrupted his thoughts to say, here it is. And oh, Naruto hadn't noticed that they had walked inside a building, too caught up in his conversation with Kurama. They were standing in front of a door at the end of the first hallway, and Miyu pushed it open, saying, I'm back. That was quick, dear, a measured, but vaguely amused voice said. I wasn't expecting you back for a while yet, she continued. Miyu shrugged, even though Gaara and Naruto were the only ones who could see it, and led them further into the room. Well, I wasn't expecting to meet a family member by accident, but here we are. Silence reigned for a few seconds before another voice, male this time, said, I'm sorry, Miyu, what did you just say? The man himself walked around the corner a few moments later and stopped in surprise when he noticed the boys behind his daughter. Miyu definitely took after her father. The tall man had short, dark red hair and warm eyes. Oh, hello, he said, once he got over his initial surprise. My name is Uzumaki Jiro. My wife, Hanako, is in the kitchen at the moment. It's good to meet you. Naruto grinned at the man. Hi, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and this is my friend Gaara. A crash made all of them jump. It sounded like Hanako had dropped something. A short blonde woman slipped in next to her husband, staring at Naruto with wide eyes. Oh, you're Kushina's boy, aren't you? She breathed. Naruto blinked, surprised. How did you? Our parents were good friends when we were children, before Kushina left for Konoha and Uzushio fell, Hanako explained, still not taking her eyes off Naruto. I spent quite a bit of time with her. She regarded the two boys curiously, tilting her head slightly. She slowly moved her gaze to Gaara, and suddenly her eyes widened in shock once more. Soon as Jinchuriki? She asked curiously. Gaara flinched, and Naruto instinctively put himself in front of the other boy. Why do you want to know? He asked severely. Hanako smiled gently at them, unfazed by Naruto's protectiveness. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, she said, meeting Gaara's eyes over Naruto's shoulder. Our family travels quite frequently. We've been avoiding Suna for the past few months. They're in a bit of an uproar over your disappearance. Gaara nodded slowly, but Naruto could still feel the tension coiled tightly behind him. Are you going to try to take him back? He asked, imperceptibly changing his stance so he was ready to run at a moment's notice. Family or not, Gaara came first. Always. No, no, Jiro said immediately, shaking his head emphatically. His expression fell, and he watched the red-headed boy sadly. We know how many of the villages treat their Jinchurikis, he said. You had more than enough reason to want to leave. Only then did the tension leave Gaara's body, leaving only a wave of relief. It was Miyu who put it together, in the end. Her perceptive eyes flickered between the two boys, and eventually she nodded to herself and asked, Are you Konoha's Jinchuriki, Naruto? Well, she figured that out fast, Kurama said, reluctantly impressed. Naruto nodded carefully. Hanako hummed disapprovingly. Well, I certainly can't fault either of you for jumping ship, she said bluntly. She glanced at her husband and said offhandedly, we should probably avoid Konoha for a bit too, then. If Suna's bad, Konoha's probably panicking just as much. Honestly, Naruto hadn't planned on his next comment. He wasn't thinking. The words were out of Naruto's mouth before he could even process what he said. You could come home with us, he offered. The corner of Gaara's mouth lifted in a tiny smile, and Naruto knew exactly why his friend was so amused. Bringing up Uzushio hadn't taken long at all. The three Uzumakis, however, were just confused. Miyu recovered first, watching Naruto with light curiosity. That's right, you didn't want to tell me where you were from yet. Naruto nodded. Didn't want to explain it twice, he said with a shrug. He took a deep breath, before looking each of the three directly in the eyes and saying, Gaara and I are rebuilding Uzushio. Now the family wasn't confused, they were completely dumbfounded. Whatever they had expected, it clearly wasn't that. Not that Naruto blamed them for their shock. It wasn't every day that a long-lost teenage relative announces that he and his friend are resurrecting a dead city. Jiro was the one who tentatively broke the silence, brows furrowed as he focused all his attention on the blonde boy. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "We've been living in Uzushio ever since we left our former villages," Gaara said calmly, shrugging nonchalantly. "We've spent the last months clearing out the ruins so we can start building it again." Miyu stared at them, a smile slowly growing on her face as she shook her head. "And do either of you know a thing about construction?" she asked incredulously. "No," Naruto admitted cheerfully. "But we don't have to. Gaara's the one who really cleaned up the village. I was learning fuinjutsu, and we found books all about how they used seals in construction, barriers, weapons, just about anything. And if Naruto could handle Biju seals, he was positive he could handle just about anything they needed." Miyu's eyes were bright with excitement, and Naruto was sure his expression was exactly the same. Meanwhile, Jiro and Hanako looked like they were still processing what Naruto told them. Hanako pressed her lips into a thin line, and "Fuck, are those tears?" "Oh no, please don't cry," Naruto said hurriedly, waving his hands in front of him with wide eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I won't do it again. I won't bring it up if you don't want me to." Hanako raised a hand in front of her, motioning for Naruto to stop, and cut him off before he could continue. "Naruto," she said seriously, searching his gaze with tear-filled eyes searching for what, Naruto wasn't sure. "Do you really think you can do this?" And maybe if someone else had asked him that question, he would have been offended, but it didn't sound like Hanako was asking out of doubt or contempt. Rather, her voice was laced with caution. "She's just scared," Kurama noted quietly, the usual bite absent from his tone. "She remembers Uzushio, even if it was destroyed when she was young. She doesn't want to lose her home again." Who would? Well, Naruto could certainly relate to that. He gave Hanako his most reassuring smile and said, "We will do this." Her expression didn't visibly change, but her eyes did brighten with something akin to hope. "We never really settled anywhere after Uzushio fell," she admitted softly. "We travel all over the elemental nations. We've stayed in some towns for a few months or so, but they never felt like home." Jiro grimaced. "I don't think anywhere else really could," he added. After a moment of silence, he sighed wistfully. "Uzushio it was something special. I could tell," Gaara replied, gazing steadily at the older man. "The village was in ruins when we arrived, yes, but I could still feel something different there. I've never felt it before. The only way I can think to describe it is feeling like I was coming home." Hanako smiled warmly at him. "That's unsurprising," she said gently. Gaara frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Jiro hummed thoughtfully, eyes slowly roaming across the room as he found the words he wanted to say. "The earth we live on is much more alive than many shinobi realize," Jiro explained, as Gaara and Naruto watched him with rapt attention and wide eyes. "The world around us is full of energy? You mean like nature chakra?" Naruto interrupted before his brain could catch up to his mouth, and he immediately clapped a hand over his mouth. "I'm so sorry," he said, the sound muffled by his hand. The older man just chuckled, no irritation or agitation entering his eyes. "Huh, I didn't know adults could be so nice." "That's all right. You're right, Naruto. Some shinobi use senjutsu, which relies on natural energy drawn from the world around them. There were never many sages to begin with, but their numbers have drastically decreased over the years, so much so that natural energy has nearly been forgotten altogether. Few learn what it is, let alone how to actually use it. But the use and understanding of natural energy was one of Uzushio's greatest strengths." Hanako took over, likely seeing the hopelessly confused expressions settling on the boys' faces. "Uzushio's strongest and most innovative seals were those that used our own chakra and natural energy. Our fuinjutsu masters were always masters of senjutsu as well. So Uzushio's secret wasn't any secret weapon or particularly dangerous seal, like most other nations assumed," she said, a faraway look in her eyes. Her lips curved into a smile. "Our secret was that we worked with the land in nearly everything we did." Naruto didn't think his eyes could widen any further, and his jaw had dropped somewhere in the middle of that explanation. "You mean you can talk to the land?" he breathed. "That's so cool." Miyu tilted her hand in a so-so motion. Sort of, she said. Mom and Dad have told me about it. Nature isn't alive in the way that you and I are, not exactly, but it has a sort of consciousness? Awareness? Good job, Miyu, Jiro said warmly, and Miyu flushed slightly under the praise. None of us know exactly how it works, or just how conscious the land is, but Uzushio's people spent generations weaving our lives together with the land so we could help each other. Gaara blinked, seemingly coming to a realization. So what I felt was, Uzushio itself? He asked hesitantly. More or less, Hanako told him with a smile. It sounds like she was accepting you, telling you that you're welcome there. So that's why it feels so safe there, Gaara said under his breath, speaking more to himself than the others in the room. The people protected their village, and in return, Uzushio protected her people, Miyu said. She turned to direct a question at her father. That's why the village's barriers were so strong, right? Jiro nodded. Part of it was because Uzushio's skills with seals were a cut above the rest, but yes, Uzushio herself was strengthening the barriers and protecting us however she could. Naruto surprised everyone, including himself, by letting out a peal of laughter. No wonder nowhere else has ever felt like home to you, he exclaimed, shaking his head. Nothing could ever compare to a village that protects you. It was practically part of your family. If anything, I think we were part of her family, Hanako mused. Gaara watched the adults carefully, weighing their information and reactions before speaking. Does this mean you'd like to come? He asked, voice tentative but words as straightforward as ever. The question was so unassuming that Miyu broke into laughter, and her parents quickly joined her. They only took a few moments to compose themselves, but with barely an exchanged glance and a firm nod, Hanako said, Miyu, I think it's time we introduce you to our home. Miyu beamed. Without warning, she shot forward and threw her arms around Naruto and Gaara. Thank you, she whispered. And in the face of the trio's smiles, watching their expressions bloom in simple happiness, Naruto couldn't help but think that everything he'd gone through in his life was worth it, if it led to moments like this. From then on, they paid much more attention to their surroundings while on supply runs or any other business outside the village. Jiro and Hanako still had to travel to different markets to sell their wares. Hanako made extraordinarily detailed, colorful blankets and clothing, and Jiro made storage scrolls and other common household seals, but they started leaving Miyu and Uzushio with the boys. At first the boys had been surprised, but when they brought it up, Miyu had just laughed and said that between two Biju and a partially sentient village, her parents figured the kids probably had more than enough adult supervision. And, well, that was fair. Miyu had jumped headfirst into studying Fuinjutsu with Naruto. It was extremely helpful to have her around, since she spent her time focusing on construction and other structural seals. Naruto was free to devote more attention to Neji's seal. It was ridiculously complicated, and sometimes Naruto had to just leave and spend an afternoon outside with Gaara when the frustration started getting to him. Whenever they were in the village, Jiro spent his time helping Gaara on the surface. Between Miyu and the two of them, it didn't take long before they were ready to start building some foundations. A benefit to having Jiro and Hanako around that Naruto hadn't anticipated was that their travels would help them find other family members much more effectively than any of the kids ever could. However, the first people the couple brought back weren't originally from Uzushio at all. In fact, they were originally from Kirigakure. Kayo and her son, Hakuyo, had been mistreated by their village due to their Kekkei Genkei ice release. Upon meeting the pair, Naruto's throat had tightened as he remembered another Yuki, Haku, someone he couldn't save. But things were different now. Now he could help. Now he could actually make a difference. Kayo and Hakuyo joined their family with little fanfare, and they fit right in, which only cemented their main goal. Uzushio wouldn't just be for Uzumaki or other families who originally lived here. No, they would take in anyone who needed a home. They all knew what it was like to be cast aside by the world, and they refused to stand by and let that happen to anyone else. And the warmth and peace Naruto felt within Uzushio's borders led him to believe that Uzushio had the exact same idea. Tensed, eyes sparking with mistrust. Why do you know that? She asked suspiciously. Naruto frowned, confused, before slapping a hand over his face. Gaara and I haven't told you yet, he muttered, voice muffled by his hand. How did I forget that Gaara and I haven't told you yet? Told us what? Naruto's words clearly hadn't done anything to reassure Hotaru, who was now shifting uncomfortably. Gaara and I are Jinchuriki too, Naruto said with a casual shrug, ignoring Hotaru's dumbfounded stare. A couple of Akatsuki members have actually come after me before. I got away from them that time, but I'm sure they haven't given up. It was definitely an interesting way to meet Sasuke's brother, Naruto thought with some amusement. He literally knocked on my door. It was the most polite attempted kidnapping I've ever heard of. He was surprisingly polite for a man who murdered his entire family. You two are like Utakata? The fear was slowly ebbing away, leaving curiosity in its wake as Hotaru watched him with wide eyes. Naruto nodded, grinning cheerfully and linking his hands behind his head. We knew right away that he was a Jinchuriki, he explained. We could feel it. Or, I guess I should say the Biju could feel it. Kurama nodded in approval at the boy's acknowledgement. Naruto was getting better at talking openly about his partnership with Kurama, but it was hard to break all the habits he had formed in Konoha. Foremost among them his habit of trying as hard as possible to keep everything about the fox hidden. Hotaru's eyes were now fixed on Naruto, her brows drawn together in thought. Aren't you worried, then? She asked. About keeping us here? Naruto blinked, exchanging a confused glance with Miyu and Hakuyo. No, he replied. Why would we be? It'll be great to have you here. The girl's thoughtful expression didn't fade. What if they find us? She asked in a near whisper. We'll have led them right to you. Now Naruto's slight frown matched the one on Hotaru's face. They were always going to come looking for me and Gaara eventually, he said, shrugging. It's probably better to stick together anyway. We have a much better chance of defending ourselves if we're working as a team. He could see her mulling that over, and Hakuyo broke the ensuing silence. You need help, like my mother and I did. That's exactly what Uzushio is for, the younger boy said, looking to Miyu for approval and relaxing at her encouraging smile. He paused, thinking, before continuing carefully. Besides, Miyu, Naruto, and Jiro are ridiculously good with seals. It should be almost impossible to notice us unless they already know the barriers are there. Exactly, Hakuyo, Miyu said, smiling brightly at the boy and ruffling his hair. Her expression sobered when she met Hotaru's eyes once more, but the warmth in her gaze didn't fade. We want people like you, and me, and everyone here, to know that they have a place here, if they want it. So don't leave because you think you're endangering us. Trust me, we can handle it. Hotaru's gaze moved between her three companions, searching their eyes, and she must have found what she was looking for, because she relaxed and nodded slowly. I'll need to talk to my companion about it first, she said. Where he goes, I follow, so if he stays, so will I. Naruto felt a pang in his chest. He had heard that kind of declaration before. Why were so many things reminding him of Haku lately? Sure, Miyu said cheerfully, getting to her feet and extending a hand to Naruto to help him up. Anyway, Naruto and I need to get back to work. I guess we still need to work out some details in the barrier seals. He could want to talk about construction, Naruto pointed out. He smiled at Hotaru. You can come with us if you want, he offered. It might get a little boring for you, though. Yeah, not everyone is a seal fanatic like us, Miyu said, knocking her shoulder against Naruto's. I'm going to practice some ninjutsu with my mother, Hakuyo said, his smile more subdued but still present. You're welcome to come with me, too. My mother loves teaching, or if you just want to watch, that's fine too. Hotaru blinked, seemingly surprised at the kid's openness. She'll get used to it soon enough, Naruto said to Kurama, who chuckled in response, but then she, too, stood with a smile. I think I'll go with you, Hakuyo. The boy just nodded and gestured for her to follow him, waving at Naruto and Miyu as they left. You think they'll stay? Naruto asked curiously. Miyu nodded without hesitation. It might take a little convincing, but I think they will, in the end. Naruto grinned as he and Miyu began walking to meet Jiro. 3 Biju in one village, he said. This is gonna be fun. Miyu was right, it did take some convincing on Utakata's part, but the odds were against him from the start. After all, he was still wounded, and his movement was limited, so after he woke up, he sort of had to listen to what Kaio and Gaara had to say. And they were not shy about telling him why he and Hotaru should stay. There was no escape, something that Naruto found absolutely hilarious. Kaio eventually wore him down, although it didn't hurt that Hotaru often visited to tell him about what she'd been learning with Hakuyo, or the conversations she'd have with Miyu, or how she was learning the fundamentals of Fuinjutsu from Naruto and Jiro. But still, without Kaio, Naruto wasn't sure that Utakata and Hotaru would have stayed past the day he woke up. Now that Uzushio had added 3, including the Biju, people to its fold, Naruto and Gaara had someone else to talk to about being a Jinchuriki. Naruto had to admit, it was nice having an actual adult to talk to about this, one who understood. As it turned out, Utakata was the Jinchuriki for the six-tailed beast, Seiken. Seiken and Shukaku were thrilled to be reunited, and Naruto could tell that Kurama was happy too, even if he wouldn't admit it. Either way, Seiken and Utakata were incredibly helpful when they asked about strengthening their relationships with their Biju partner. Sure, a lot of the things they told Naruto were things he'd done or thought of already. You can't be partners if you never talk to Kurama or Shukaku, Utakata had said dryly. But his meditation techniques were new. As expected of the hyperactive boy, it took a lot of effort to stay in the same place for too long, especially when trying to calm his mind at the same time. He did eventually get it down, though Utakata and Gaara had both stayed with him until he succeeded, patiently waiting no matter how many times Naruto lost his concentration. For all his help, though, Utakata really didn't like being referred to as their teacher for some reason. The boys definitely wouldn't make that mistake twice. It was while Naruto and Gaara were sitting with their teacher but not really one morning that Hotaru sprinted up to them, slightly out of breath. Utakata frowned in concern and stood, but before he could approach her, she said just one word. Akatsuki. Naruto stiffened involuntarily, as did Gaara. Is it the same people as last time? Utakata asked, voice firm but not unkind. Hotaru shook her head. I don't recognize these two, she admitted, frowning as she twisted her fingers together. There was a man with orange hair and a dark-haired woman. Hanako and I never crossed the village border, so they didn't notice us or Uzushio, but they're closer than I thought they'd be. Utakata nodded, face pensive. It's not reassuring that none of us recognizes either of them, Naruto commented. If we leave them alone, they'd likely move on without our interference, Kurama pointed out. They can't possibly tell that we're here. Utakata's eyes suddenly widened slightly, worry appearing for a brief moment in his usually stoic expression. Oh, Gaara was watching the older Jinchuriki like a hawk. What? He asked. Did you think of something? Seiken thinks they can tell we're here vaguely, at least. They obviously can't tell exactly where we're hiding, or they'd have come to us already, but they can probably still tell that we're here somewhere. How, though? Naruto burst out. We checked our barrier seals over and over again, they were working perfectly. What happened? The seals couldn't contain our chakra. All heads turned to see Jiro making his way towards them, face grave. Well, more accurately, it looks like they couldn't contain your chakra. The barriers we made could hold up under the combined chakra of Uzushio and 2 Jinchuriki, but every seal has a limit, and adding another Biju to the mix overpowered the seals. Some of our chakra must be leaking out, not enough to tell them exactly where we are, but enough for them to know they're in the right place. Of course, Naruto thought, frustrated. Just when one problem was solved, another, worse, problem seemed to follow right behind. Well, what do we do now? We can't just leave them alone anymore. He could tell Kurama was thinking, but the fox didn't offer up any suggestions. Suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind, and he blinked. Well, it worked with Haku. Raising his voice slightly to be heard above the others in the group, he said, I have an idea, but none of you are going to like it. He didn't really love it either, but he couldn't think of anything else. His outburst had everyone staring at him in varying states of trepidation. And what's that? Jiro finally asked, breaking the uneasy silence that had followed the blonde's declaration. Naruto took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. They're going to kill me, he said mournfully, and Kurama simply rolled his eyes in response. I'll go convince them to leave. Okay, so that wasn't exactly the most eloquent way he could have phrased his idea, but it got the point across well enough. Hotaru's face paled, and Jiro stared at Naruto like he couldn't understand what he was seeing. You want to go talk to them, he said incredulously. The blonde boy shrugged. Pretty much, yeah. What makes you think there's any possibility that they'd listen to you? Utakata asked evenly, calming much faster than the rest of the group. Naruto would love Utakata forever for speaking to the blonde like an equal, rather than being patronizing or condescending in his question. They're searching for us, after all. What if they try to take you and run? Naruto frowned, turning to face the older Jinchuriki. I didn't say I'd go alone, he said, voice almost petulant as he and Utakata met each other's gaze. You didn't say much at all, Gaara said, the tiniest note of amusement coloring his tone. And, honestly, that was fair. He sort of blurted out his plan before really thinking about any of the details. But that didn't stop Naruto's small huff of frustration. Well, if we already know that the chakra suppression seals can't handle 3 Jinchuriki and a sentient village, what makes you sure that the barrier seals will hold up? Naruto explained, folding his arms over his chest. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be fine. But if we go find them first, then the meeting will be on our terms, instead of letting them catch us by surprise if they get through the barriers. Also, Utakata continued the boy's train of thought, expression pensive, if we go to them, it's quite possible that we could keep Uzushio a secret altogether. If they come to us, there's no chance of that. Jiro met Utakata's gaze steadily, the two adults seeming to have a silent conversation before Jiro sighed heavily. You're taking Kaio and Utakata with you, he told Naruto sternly. The blonde knew the only reason Jiro wasn't adding himself to their group was that he was a merchant, not a shinobi. As callous as it sounded, he had no place in this if it turned into a fight, and he knew it. I'm coming too, Gaara announced. Jiro opened his mouth, presumably to tell him to remain in the village where he was safe, but he fell silent when Gaara met his gaze head-on, eyes eerily bright. I'm coming too, he repeated, eyes never wavering. Jiro looked away first. Well, I highly doubt that any two people can handle 3 Jinchurikis and an experienced kunoichi all at once, especially if they're only expecting me and Utakata, Hotaru said slowly, eyes shifting from Jiro to Gaara cautiously. After a moment, her eyes lit up, and she turned to Utakata, who cut her off before she could utter a single word. You are staying here, he said simply. However, seeing Hotaru's disappointed expression, he softened almost imperceptibly. Hotaru, he said patiently, we can't take all of our fighters with us. We need someone to stay here to protect the village. Hotaru took a moment to process his words, then absolutely lit up, disappointment forgotten. I won't let you down, she promised. Utakata's lips twitched, almost curving into a tiny smile for a moment. I know you won't. And that settled it. As Utakata, Gaara, Naruto, and Kaio headed towards the edge of the village, Gaara leaned over to mutter to Naruto, I never thought I'd ever willingly walk towards someone trying to capture me. Naruto smiled at his friend, lowering his voice to the same volume. You know, back in Konoha I had a title, I guess, he said, recalling one of the few things about Konoha that didn't hurt to think about. They called me the #1 most unpredictable ninja. Oh, so it's your fault? The redhead responded wryly, raising a teasing eyebrow at his friend. Naruto shrugged. Yeah, he admitted easily, linking his fingers behind his head. Things never go according to plan when I'm around. Sorry, I guess this is your life now, he finished mischievously. Gaara snorted, turning his head forward once again so he could survey the land before them. Don't apologize, he said with a small smile. You're right that nothing about you is predictable, it never has been. Yes, my life has never been weirder. But I've never been happier, either. And that concludes part 1 of this story. Thank you for spending your time here at Ichiraku Ramen and listening all the way to the end. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows the shinobi world to continue through new adventures and alternate timelines. If you enjoyed City of Strays, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Once again, full credit goes to RijusHope and CopyOthers, the original writers of this story. If you would like to read the original version, you can find the link to the story in the description below. Let me know in the comments what story you would like to hear next. Until the next time, stay safe, and I'll see you again at Ichiraku Ramen.